Is a diplomatic correspondent for the Times of Israel, Lazar Berman, who joins us from Jerusalem this morning. Mr. Berman, thank you very much for your time. There has been a widespread call for an immediate end to hostilities in order to allow for, I suppose, a different process as opposed to armed conflict. Is that something that you think is likely to be listened to, particularly from the side of Israel?
Absolutely not. I can't be more clear on that. This is an unprecedented thing that we're seeing, an unprecedented day. Let me stress that this is the biggest mass slaughter of Jews since 1945, since the Holocaust. There is absolutely no way that the Israeli people, that the Israeli government is going to stop right now. There is still battles going on today, this morning. More terrorists infiltrated into Israel. The fighting on the ground still continues within Israeli communities. Let me stress, these are not settlements or anything like that. These are within 1948 Israel. These are places where civilians were shot in the head, women were raped, where people were kidnapped and taken into Gaza. There is no way that the government stops there. The question is, when does the ground phase begin, whether it's this week, whether it's next week? But I fully expect after this phase of bombings by the Air Force, after Israel manages at some point to take control of the situation again within communities inside of Israel, then we'll see the IDF moved to the offensive and re-enter the Gaza Strip. Again, this is a place where Israel left in 2005, and Hamas took over by force, killing the rival members of the Palestinian Authority in 2007, but I am waiting for the next phase of the ground offensive, and I think observers are as well.
While Israel is pleading for support and sympathy of the global community, Mr. Berman, there are those who say that this boiling point, that this long-standing war has come to now, Israel has to take full responsibility of it because there has been a deliberate targeting of civilians in the occupied territories of Palestine, and therefore Israel does not really deserve sympathy. Do you go along with that?
Absolutely not. I mean, any time that Jews are slaughtered, we can go back, we mentioned 1945 and the Holocaust, there are always people who will make excuses. Let me say, when you talk about occupied territories, again, Israel left the Gaza Strip in 2005, left up greenhouses and things for the Palestinians to retake, that economy and to build something there. Hamas took over by force, and Hamas is responsible for what happens within the Gaza Strip. Even if we want to look at more recent examples, Israel certainly doesn't want to keep going and doing these rounds of fighting every year. It's not something that looks good for whatever government is in power. It's something that gets in the way of the economy. It's something that you can see Israel is trying to find ways to do without, to figure out a way to keep calm between Israel and the Hamas terrorist group in the Gaza Strip. I think that Israel somewhat naively recently was thinking that more economic incentives would fit into Hamas' interests. We remember that Hamas stayed out of the most recent round of fighting between the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group and Israel. And I think Israeli leaders were caught by surprise and were fooled by Hamas. But this is not something that Israel has been looking for. This does not serve, fighting is not something that serves Israel's interests, larger interests in any way. But when you have, it'll probably be something like 1,000 at least civilians who have been slaughtered within their homes and more than 100 kidnapped, there's really no way that any responsible Israeli leadership can do anything but respond in a way that we have not seen in the past, respond in a way that I think will line up with what we're hearing calls from, among government officials, a war that ends with the collapse of the Hamas government. And hopefully in the future you will see more responsible Palestinian Authority returning to the Gaza Strip and turning that into a place which is not an armed camp, which is threatening Israel and threatening Israelis, but is a place with somewhat more responsible leadership with which Israel can talk with.
Let's talk about the situation as it holds right now, Mr. Berman. On the side of the screen there, as we're talking to you, we're showing live pictures. I can't tell exactly whether this is Gaza, the Gaza Strip, but how would you describe the situation as it holds, given that declaration of war by the Prime Minister Netanyahu and, to quote him directly, wanting to reduce Gaza, I think, reduce Gaza into quote-unquote dust. What will that ultimately look like, in your view?
It's a good question. So the situation right now, again, there is still fighting on the ground within Israeli communities, which is something surprising. I think Israelis, even after the initial shock of Saturday, expected the army to very quickly get control over Israeli communities. That still hasn't happened. There was still massive infiltration by Hamas terrorists overnight, so the battle still goes on in cities like Sderot, Kibbutz Be'eri, and things like that. Like we've seen in the past, the Air Force is taking the bulk of the operation right now in terms of striking Hamas and Islamic Jihad headquarters. These, of course, are hidden within civilian areas. This is done intentionally so that, as you've heard on your own show, that people will get to blame Israel and make things up about the targeting civilians. Absolute falsehood. I think it is inevitable, given the tight urban nature of most of the cities in the Gaza Strip, that we are going to have a war with high casualties, unfortunately high civilian casualties. It's something that serves Hamas interests. It's something that Hamas intentionally uses as part of its strategy, but that is what I expect. From the Air Force bombardment, the Palestinian authorities in Gaza, so the Hamas Health Ministry is talking about somewhat close to 500, over 500 probably, at this point, casualties from the Israeli airstrikes that will likely continue to rise. And once there is a ground invasion, those figures will probably rise much more sharply. A ground invasion means that you have tanks, infantry troops, artillery protecting those troops, and that can actually be much more fatal, much more lethal than an airstrike, which can be, especially in the Israeli case, extremely precise. So, if indeed this ground invasion does happen, I think we're going to look at a somewhat protracted and indeed quite a lethal operation, something that again Israel was not looking for, but I think has no choice at this point but to undertake.
Yeah. Final question to you, and very briefly, if you can. The Israeli intelligence community has been blamed for the kind of attack that Israel has experienced, and some of them saying they've been caught napping. Do you anticipate fallout?
Absolutely. I think there's no way that a responsible and self-critical country like Israel can abide the fact this is probably the biggest intelligence failure since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. We just marked the 50th anniversary of that on October 6th. And to be taken by surprise by an organization like Hamas, which is something that Israel has been focused on in terms of its intelligence, in terms of its intelligence community, in terms of its military for decades. So to be taken by surprise like this, absolutely unforgivable. But right now the focus is, again, on gaining control of the situation inside of Israel's civilian communities to take the fight into the Gaza Strip and against the Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And afterward, as Israel does, after they did after the 2006 war, after the 1973 Yom Kippur War, I anticipate, I'm sure there will be a soul-searching process, commissions of inquiry which will look into where the failure was and who needs to be held responsible. Anything short of that, I think, is letting people who are asleep at the switch and allowed this butchery to take place to get off scot-free, and that is something I think that cannot happen and will not happen.
Lazar Berman is a diplomatic correspondent for the Times of Israel. Thank you very much for your time.